Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Sky Sports F1 podcast. Now the dust might have settled on a rather bonkers Las Vegas Grand Prix, but we're going to try and answer the question, did it live up to the hype? And to help me do that, I'm joined by Craig Slater and Simon Lazenby. Hello to you both. Simon, I'll start with you. Very simple question. What time do you think it is right now?
Yeah, I'm all over the place. I had 10 hours on the plane. Got back, went straight to sleep at 10, woke up at 4, then went back to sleep at 9. I think that it kind of sums it up, really. It was it was bonkers for sleep this week. But as I said, we put our viewers through it so often that it was time for us to suffer.
I did the school run. I got back straight away and did the school run after. And actually, I had to drive to. I couldn't get a flight from Vegas. I had to drive to and from Los Angeles, then fly economy overnight all the way back, and then did the school run. Probably not very safely,
right.
But hey.
You're harder than I am, Craig. Much harder.
Impressive stuff. So as I mentioned, we'll try and answer that question. Did it live up to the hype? And we'll try and do that through a number of sort of ways and talk about the event, the Verstappen comments, the show versus the sport. But guys, you were both there. Simon, just give us an overview of what it was like to work at. And I guess I'm maybe coming at this from the angle of, we've been to Miami recently, haven't we? And in your career working on F1, you must have been to quite a few new racetracks and new events. Where does this rank in terms of a new event on the calendar?
Well, in terms of scale, there's never been anything bigger than it. But I think we all knew that coming into the weekend. I go back to what Max said at the start of the weekend, saying it was 99% show and 1% sport. And then the delicious irony of him being dressed as Elvis, spraying champagne on the top step of the podium and going to the Bellagio and going into that Rolls Royce. Max calls it as it is. I can see where he was coming from, but at the same time, I think then the racing spoke for itself. And with that, I think you have to say that it offered both the show and the razzmatazz and also the quality of racing that we hoped. And it was a little bit like Baku, but better, as Lewis had said. So I think that scale-wise, never seen anything bigger. Timing-wise, if I was going to change one thing, I think everybody thinks that you could, if you can sort out the logistics of the local traffic and you can close down the strip earlier, why not have a 6 or 7 in the evening race and qualifying, which works for the East Coast in America and means that potentially people over this side of the pond can stay up for it rather than get up for it. And I wonder how the balance would work there in terms of viewing figures. I think perhaps it might be bigger if people stayed up on a Saturday night rather than getting up Sunday morning. So I think that's what they have to kind of balance up.
Yeah, well, I could bring the perspective of pay-per-view boxing. That was my 19th visit to Las Vegas. 16 times previously I've been for big fights, which interestingly are scheduled much earlier in the day than they would be if they were on the East Coast of America. So typically you'd see the main event fight getting in the ring at 7 or 8 o'clock, so it would be 9 or 10 p.m. on the East Coast. Now, I've been in touch with organisers and some leading figures at Formula One today, in actual fact, to put that very question to them. And I can reveal that there will be talks about making it an earlier start time next time. Now, nothing confirmed yet, but there will be discussions to see if, by common consent, the one thing which was particularly hard to deal with out there, and actually, if we go back to Thursday and all the shenanigans then impacted on the fan experience as well, I think they will be looking at, is it worthwhile making it start a little bit earlier? So that is something. What I would say about it is, on a scale and what it did to Las Vegas, for all there were mumblings about the disruption and maybe local residents not being too happy with F1 being there, it was a bonanza night for the city of Las Vegas in economic terms. We won't get the full financial results until the end of the year or when the casinos publish their final quarter results for the new year. But one casino boss described it as being like New Year's Eve for the race weekend itself. And that is not normally a brilliant weekend for Las Vegas. So if they can have that every year with something approaching 100,000 people coming in, many of the big casinos were sold out, with room rates, by all accounts, still pretty high, even though the Las Vegas market does tend to drop a little bit when you get absolutely on the event itself. There are some bargains to be had. Then this is a success story for Las Vegas, and no question, I think we will be there for the entirety of the contract and maybe beyond, which is 10 years.
Still reflecting, Craig, on you going to Vegas 19 times in your
battle
career.
harder.
That has to be,
I'm only 25. I'm only 25. And I look, just because I look 50 doesn't mean
Simon, just to pick up on what Craig said there, because next year, when we look at Vegas in the calendar, it's going to kick off the triple header. The final 3 races of the season are going to begin with Vegas next year. I can see you smiling already, even just contemplating that. Surely there does have to be a change to the schedule to allow the teams and everyone who's associated with Formula One the chance to at least give them a fighting chance to be able to survive until Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Shov from Mercedes and a couple of other people from within different camps, and it's not we just talk out loud for a living, right? So we can do that whenever. We're not the ones that are putting together Formula One cars and then debriefing as engineers do and had to with the drivers. And after that, what night was it? Was it the Thursday night? I lose track. So it was a Thursday night, wasn't it? Which was the late finish, 2:30 till 4. They then went into their debriefs, their engineering meetings, and I think it was one of the driver's trainers literally had to pull him out of one of the debriefs because they really have to stick to these rigid plans of sleep to make sure that they can operate at their best when it comes to qualifying in the race. And it was getting to that point where it was just not tenable for them to do that. So there was a balance to strike. And I think going to bed at 7 a.m, it doesn't matter how you've attuned your body to the time difference. It's gonna really wear you down. The fact that it's just hard to get enough sleep. There's thumping music coming. There's the planes coming from the airport as well. I should imagine if you're a driver and you want to have your 8 hours beauty sleep, that was one of the difficulties for them. So also at the beginning of a triple header, to then think of them going straight on after a D-rig and a pack up and having to do that to go to Qatar and then to Abu Dhabi, that is going to be brutal because I think there's another triple header before then, isn't there? So next year, the end of it, long season. I know they've scheduled in another little break in October time, which will help the teams, but absolutely everything points to them having to change the schedule. And I think as Craig was revealing there, I would imagine that everybody will be behind that.
You're saying that maybe make it a standalone event next year.
Well, I mean, you could do that, but
detach it from the final triple header, because there is a little bit of a space, but I don't think it'd be easy to do, to be honest. Yeah. But let's see. Yeah,
I mean, it's full now. It's getting to that point where it is full. Yeah. Before we get into 24 races.
So I had a discussion with one of our bosses actually about early in the weekend before the race, and I think the race made up for a lot. We'll get on to talking about the race and how good or otherwise it was. Very good in my opinion. But it was, who is this race for? And then, like you outlined, Simon, it was such a compromised time slot, and I never feel comfortable with that. I mean, I quite often in Britain we've had, coming from the sport I previously covered, boxing again, you would occasionally have fights in the middle of the night at Wembley for an American audience, and I just don't. To me, it makes more sense to have it at its proper, or a reasonable American time zone, to have it primarily for its market of its territory that it exists in, and then the rest of us can get up and watch it. Maybe, like you say, maybe have an all-nighter, and in a televisual sense, at least, it's sometimes not such a bad thing to have something on the middle of a night on a Saturday night. It can cater to a particular audience, whether it's nightclubs or students or. There is, I think people do get up and make an appointment to view for something like that, or if you can, if you're a family type of person, you watch the replay. But I think maybe to have it live at the time it was didn't feel right in either. It didn't really suit America, and it didn't really suit Europe either.
Let's move on to talk about the comments from Max Verstappen. And Simon, you mentioned it earlier in regards to what he had to say about the event. First off, Do we think Max was right to criticise the event early on in the weekend? Simon, I'll start with you. When you heard those comments, what was your reaction to him kind of not quite towing the party line, as it were?
Those comments from Max were Max being the pure racing driver that he is, that everybody respects up and down there. He'll call it as it is, and that's that. And he felt like a clown being paraded in front of, just at the warm-up ceremony, the opening ceremony. He said that he felt like a clown standing there. Now, if he is one of those that doesn't like that aspect of the job, that's fine. I think he could have just kept his counsel. I think that's the only thing. I think it probably will have annoyed, it's going to have annoyed Liberty, it's going to have annoyed Formula One, because they've put so much behind this. It's £500 million investment, and they're the promoter of the F1 race in Vegas. So it's not going to go down well, because he is the triple world champion. He is the reigning world champion. And then I kind of think he stepped back a little bit once he enjoyed the race. And we all enjoyed the race. There was multiple overtakes. He had to work for it. In fact, it was one of probably the hardest he's had to work for a race victory this year. So once he was convinced that the track was worth its salt and that it produced what was to him a fun race, then he about-faced a little bit and said, that was good. I enjoyed that, and sang Viva Las Vegas, and did everything they needed to do. Could he have just kept quiet for the beginning bit? It might have helped the promoter out, but Max is Max, and he's refreshing, and that's what a lot of people love him for.
Mm.
He was asked the question, Simon, wasn't he? And I was on Ted Kravitz's podcast. It seemed to be the darling of the Sky podcast.
Very well.
They must be really struggling for guests. But anyway, but Ted was pursuing his usual conspiracy angle. No, I'm not saying that. He raised the question about, he was slightly put in a corner, but as a journalist, we knew what we were going to get if we asked Max that question, because of what he's come out and said previously about not necessarily liking Netflix or the razzmatazz, but want to focus on the racing. So I think it was his direct answer to a direct question. He's perfectly entitled to that opinion. And what I think it did spark a very useful debate. I 100% agree with you. I think he did change his tune. I think he's much less of a Las Vegas skeptic today than he was a week ago. But it's a fascinating. I look at this. There's so many different ways to look at this. One or two people have seen this as new circuits versus old circuits, and I don't know what you recall, Simon, but a bit like you, I think I'd been to 2 or 3 races before we got the rights in 2012 in the flesh. And I remember in those early years thinking, it's quite an old demographic, looking around at the various tracks we went to around the world, and obviously you don't get much chance to do that with Britain. It was an aging demographic. There wasn't that much on offer to fans at some of these old circuits. And I think F1 did need the transfusion that Liberty Media have given it, and which has raised the level of the fan experience across the board at some of these new venues, like Miami, like Las Vegas. I think back to going to places like Hockenheim and Nürburgring, there's just no real facilities for fans. Great circuits, yes, but years of having to pay maybe excessive fees or fees they couldn't sustain, dropping off fan interest as well. They had sagged as places where you could come and have a good time watching the racing. So I kind of understand that I think the world has moved on a little bit, and I think there's a certain romanticism in some people's mind thinking about this golden epoch when it was, Monza, Nürburgring, Spa, etc., etc. And there always is that tendency to romanticize the past. I think he's absolutely right, though. We do need to, maybe the sport does need to find ways of reigniting the support base in some of those traditional centres which have lost it a little bit, particularly Germany. And maybe more needs to be done. He talked about this after qualifying, didn't he? We more invested in not just the razzmatazz, but explaining the level of performance that drivers reach in a race. So it's not so much that he doesn't want, well, it probably is that he doesn't necessarily want the razzmatazz, but he wants more emphasis on the racing, so it counterbalances the glitz.
I thought as well his comments were interesting in that so often as journalists and people who work on that side of Formula One, we're trying to get out different responses from drivers. Simon, Craig, you've probably done so many interviews where you've asked a question and you could probably predict the answer that a sports person is going to give in response, because that's the party line. That's what they always tend to say. And I think Max isn't
putting
doing
it
that.
bluntly. Putting it bluntly, Max, it's like they've spent $700 million on this. Let's get Max to kind of take it down a peg. It's sort of hubris versus,
yeah.
And actually, with very little else going on story-wise, it was always going to be a bit of a. And I'm not trying to say that wasn't what I would have covered myself, because it's perfectly legitimate grounds to look at, and I think it's very interesting, the whole issue.
Yeah. I just think actually having someone who's being honest and speaking their mind is something that often we're asking for, and when it happens, it's actually a great thing for it to happen. Simon, do you subscribe to the fact that maybe Max is kind of becoming a bit of a celebrant of the kind of the purists of motorsport, isn't he? In the last, I feel like he's becoming quite likable for that. He's a true racer, isn't he, at his core, and he seems to be kind of harnessing that and pushing that agenda forward in as we've said, in a sport that's definitely moving in all sorts of different directions.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's what he stands for. I think with a racing father who's undoubtedly a purist, and the fact that he loves racing in Europe, I think, more than anything. As you're going back to your point, Craig, I think he's really like that. Whereas you compare him to somebody like Lewis, who arrives at some weekends and you feel like, okay, this isn't his kind of weekend. When he arrives at a US Grand Prix, one of the three, he's in his element because he likes that. He knows that he's got a big fan base in the States, and it brings out the best in him. I always think that he's a totally different character when he arrives, whereas I think Max, because of what comes with racing in America, inevitably it's going to be a bigger show over there. It doesn't sit with him as well as it sits with others. So yes, I do think he's a purist. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's a balance to be struck, isn't it, about building this sport and growing in new territories, which then takes it back to full circle to what Craig was saying about why don't you just please the local market for timings, as opposed to trying to keep that European audience happy, which is the core base of it. But at the same time, I do think it could have been managed better this weekend on that front. And I think, but the thing with America and these races is that when they find a problem or they think, okay, that didn't work well this year, they try to rectify it for the next year. They're very, very good at that because they learn fast. They are very malleable and adaptable. And I think that's why we'll see significant changes. One thing, for example, there's just as a side thing, I was fully expecting to see a brilliant shot of a Formula One car going past the Bellagio fountains from behind the fountains as they go up like that. But of course, you didn't get that because the catch fencing was in the way. And then we had our Bellagio moment at the end, which took about 25 minutes to get there and back. So there are a couple of little things like that. That I thought, all right, maybe let's see if we can tweak that for next year. But it looked great from the air, didn't it? It looked like Singapore did.
Phenomenal.
Lit up, great backdrop, great cityscape at night, because it's totally different. As Craig, having been there for 19 occasions, with Vegas, when it's not lit up, those buildings are kind of 70s and a little bit drab, and you wouldn't want to have it in the daylight because it would completely defeat the object of the Vegas Grand Prix. So I know I got a bit of a tangent, but yes, I get what he is about being principled and a purist racer, and that will appeal to a lot of the core fan base.
Devil's advocate, is he addressing his core fan base and telling them what they want to hear? being slightly,
maybe.
I always remember the Proclaimers. Remember, the Proclaimers is the Scottish band, and they always used to come across. I remember there was one kid on Saturday Superstore saying, "I like the Proclaimers because they don't have an image. They're just pure musicians." And yet, of course, they had an image, but their image was, "We are pure musicians." Listen, I love. You can't have everyone the same in F1. You can't have everyone a kind of, a cheerleader for everything Formula One is. You need to have these arguments and discussions, and it's fantastic that I think Max speaks out. It's absolutely necessary to have that as well. But it's like, at the same time, we can't get away from the notion that we should all be written. Hockenheim couldn't get 60,000 people through the doors in 2018. For the last race there, with Sebastian Vettel in a Ferrari, a title contender. So what do you do?
To play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate, does Max care? Is he one of these people that goes on social media and does his own stuff, or does he have someone doing it for him? I don't see him as the kind of person that's trawling through comments going, "I've got to say this." I just think it's innate, and he knows what those pure race fans want to hear. You're right. And says it, but I think actually it's part of his DNA, and nothing's going to change him. So
that speech he made after qualifying, you can find it online. That was very powerful, and that's worth listening to and very thought through. And I think that's out of the whole debate that he started. I think that is real food for thought. So I think it's been a good debate, the whole thing.
Yeah. A couple of other sort of key moments across the weekend. Obviously, we have to talk a little bit about Friday and the drain covers. It was obviously a long time ago, and I don't want to dwell too much on it. But Craig, you spoke to fans afterwards, didn't you? And what was the sentiment amongst those people? Because I was trying to compare it to other sports and thinking, if you'd, I guess maybe like Wimbledon, possibly, if you'd, back in the day, you might have seen 10 minutes of play on the outside courts and then gone, "Oh, it's raining and we can't see any more." But because there were no support races, the only thing you would have seen for your quite expensive ticket, I would expect, would have been 9 minutes of track action, which is it's probably not enough, is it?
Yeah, you don't like rushing out to go and speak to people who are going to probably say something negative about the sport, which gives you a living at the end of the day. But I think you can't have credibility as a broadcaster or as a journalist unless you go and have those voices heard if such circumstances arise. So I was quite surprised. I didn't hear many others go and speak to the fans, funnily enough, about that whole episode. What was very interesting was, actually, although the ones I think we played out were probably more on the negative side, the whole sample, most people, although they were, of course, a bit put out, were quite philosophical about it, in actual fact. Most of them had 3-day tickets. The ones who didn't have a 3-day ticket were, as you can imagine, thinking, well, what do I do now? But I getting back to what we were talking about initially about how well the event is run, that was the sense I got. They'd been well catered for during the day. There was good food on offer. There were entertainments. A good effort was made to provide a show even when the cars weren't off. That it did mitigate the fact that not much, well, almost zero action happened. Funnily enough, there was one person who said to me, and you're kind of, when you're in that situation, I'm not saying you're looking for a negative comment, but you're expecting angry fans. One of them said to me, but the 8 minutes was really good. I was like, goodness.
That FP1 session.
You know what? I need some of your positivity in my life. I was at that point. But, I mean, that was let's hope Netflix were behind the scenes in the Situation Room or whatever it's called at that point, because that would be unmissable drama. I mean, that if the event felt like in crisis at that point, what a job they did to fill in 60. I've learned 60 of those water valves and with cement in 5 hours.
And now they're putting them back, aren't they? Now,
Yeah.
they must be doing that.
And then the Fred Vasseur thing with Tom Clarkson, it was like you feel for Tom in that situation, but it's That was
Simon,
was
did you ever
expensive.
think you'd do a FP2 session at 4 a.m?
No, I didn't think I'd do that. We were all going mad by that stage because we'd been up for 22 hours. Because you know this, when you go that way, everybody's waking up at 5 a.m. anyway. It doesn't matter what you try to do So, yeah, I mean that was one of the stories of the weekend. I think that's what made it unique and probably a bit special. But it was certainly confusing. When we're finishing it, coming on air at 2:30 for 4 a.m. you're thinking that's local. East Coast it's 5:30 on air. It actually worked out well for the UK audience but I think that's why they need to change it, because it's just not fair on the teams.
The final couple of points. I do want to talk about the racing a little bit, but there was one thing that I thought was an interesting discussion about Miami. And where now the success of Vegas, and I think we can all agree that was a hugely successful race. It delivered amazing racing on a brilliant street track through the under the lights in Las Vegas. I wonder what Miami think now of the 3 US races. Simon, I'll come to you on this maybe. Like, where does that sit? You've obviously got Austin, which is the racetrack in terms of, it is a out and out racetrack. But would Miami kind of go, well, we're a street track, but we're probably not delivering the same level of racing that we saw on Sunday?
Oh, well, if I was to rank them at the moment, this is really dangerous, but Austin 1, Vegas 2, Miami 3 at the moment on the basis of this year. I just think that the Circuit of the Americas has done such a good job and always gets over 400,000 fans there year on year. It's a great racetrack, one of the best racetracks I think we go to on the calendar. And you talk about purists, that's one that no one can argue. It's really cemented, I think, its number one status, and it's for the others to try to change and make it like that. I know they've all got different feels. They all do have genuinely different feels. But my favourite feel is Austin, and that's just a subjective thing. I've always liked going there. I think it's a great city. I think you get a lot of really, really knowledgeable fans there too. You get a big Mexican contingent that are always cheering on Sergio Perez. They love motorsport over there. And you get people flying in from all over the States to go and sample it because they know that it's become a real staple of the calendar. So that's still my favourite. I think there's a place for all three of them. And I think that Vegas will grow and learn. And it was a good start in the end, and they rescued it, as Craig said, from what was the most embarrassing start that they would have wanted. And they turned it round, and the racing was good, and it was different racing to what you get at the Circuit of the Americas. So, yeah, I think, as you said, it's the space for all three, but I think Vegas and Miami, that identity and improving on what they've got will definitely be their priority over the next 2 or 3 years.
The Miami one, I suppose, it's what is its USP now. It's interesting. People were questioning what is Monaco's USP now that Las Vegas is on the calendar, aren't they? And which is an interesting, that's sacrilegious for the purists like Simon down there. But yeah. I mean the Lewis
then,
kind
Greg,
of.
do you agree with the ranking there? Do you agree with the ranking system?
Yeah, no, I think you got it spot on. Yeah, and yeah, Lewis had a bit of a question the Miami track, didn't he, last week about how. But what it might create is a bit of an arms race, hopefully, between the three of them to work on their products. Maybe Vegas will try to be a bit more move a little bit to quieten the dissenting voices, and maybe the others. Austin, I think especially our generation of folk coming into F1, Simon, we'll always fall in love. We're falling in love with Austin, haven't we?
Yeah, we have,
from the first visit. And it's just that it'll always be special to those of us that went to that first race.
And who knows, maybe a fourth in America in the near future as well.
It was interesting that somebody said, can't remember who it was that said New York as well. They mentioned New York, didn't they?
Yeah, someone I heard that this weekend. Yeah, I can't remember who it was.
Somebody high up the food chain.
I drove around that. Yeah, I drove around that New Jersey. There's a New Jersey. There was a pit building built, and there's a New Jersey kind of layout, which the old New Jersey mayor was kind of keen on, and then they kiboshed. But it has that. It was kind of based on a Spa-esque kind of elevated Eau Rouge style section, but it's whether it ever gets. We're at the limit now, aren't we? Of who loses out if Austin comes in, New York rather comes in.
I'm sure they'll find someone to suffer if it means they're building it over there. Do you know what I mean? It feels like that's absolutely the direction, and nothing's stopping it over in the States at the moment. And that's, it's good for the growth and the popularity, as we said. If they're cracking it over in the States, then that helps it globally. So I could easily see there being a fourth one added from over there.
Just a final point then on the racing and the success of it. Craig, I know you've got to go soon, so just a brief word really on how much you enjoyed not just the event, but the on-track action. Because to my mind, it was one of the best races we've had all year. When I know Verstappen, obviously, was never really in doubt by the last few laps, but the fact that Charles got Sergio Perez on the last lap, I mean, it just delivered brilliant drama, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Charles might have won had it not been for the second safety car, or maybe Ferrari's choices again, should they have changed tyres for his last stint. So it's there'll be those that say, well, it was all a bit, when you see. Then on the negative side, if you say, the cold tires thing, and do you want to see a driver of Lando Norris's skill have an off like that, which is probably related more to the conditions than his abilities. Of course, it was related to the conditions. So was there too much Las Vegas casino jeopardy against that? It's the same for everyone, and it's as we said at the outset, it's got to be a contender for race of the year.
Yeah, it does. And when you think about what it's thrown up for the last race in Abu Dhabi, because the net gainers were Aston Martin, weren't they, and Ferrari, and therefore it's close to within 11 points now. I think Aston Martin and McLaren, and 4 points Ferrari and Mercedes, and that's brilliant for Abu Dhabi. I mean, this is into the millions of pounds, $10 million probably for second, and Mercedes will want to cling on to it. And actually, when you think about the nature of the Abu Dhabi track, probably more a Ferrari track than it is a Mercedes track, I would have thought. Certainly the first half of the track is, with the kind of technical slow stuff and the long straights. Maybe the second half of the track is a little bit more swayed towards Mercedes, but then you have to worry about the Ferrari deck. So I think that we've got potentially a really good grand finale with a lot still at stake, and we're talking about the lower places too, and that's a good thing. And going to what we saw in Vegas, it wasn't just the racing at the front. We saw a couple of brilliant drives through the pack. Got to give some props, haven't we, to Lance Stroll and to Esteban Ocon to make up that amount. Yeah. So it had a bit of everything. It had back and forth. It had coming togethers. It had a couple of safety cars. It had racing to the end. And that's what we want from these street tracks. And that's what you get when it is, tyres on a cold track and people locking up and the wall's really close and a few bumps here and there. So, yeah, I think it had the racing, which made it live up to the hype.
I think, Lance does deserve, and then if you think what might he have done if he'd been fully fit at the start of the year with the better car, he might have had a completely different season. But get back to your Ferrari versus Mercedes thing. Fred Vasseur puts one over on Toto Wolff, a year into the job or whatever. That's quite. I thought he came of age a little bit, I'm finding him becoming a little. I mean, as a kind of believable Ferrari figurehead.
Yeah.
Not
I
believable.
agree, Craig. I agree. I think the way he was in the press conference, the anger
Yes.
that he
That's what I
embodied
mean.
would have made him
Yes.
a lot more liked by the Tifosi because he felt it, didn't he, in himself? He felt the
100%.
anger.
He was, and also he was in the pack. You could see it in his eye blaze. You felt like there's a man who is going to lead this team and is going to confront others, not just kind of, I don't know, be in their stew in their own corner or kind of be a shy, retiring type. Not suggesting all previous incumbents of that job necessarily were like that, but targeted. I thought he felt like a genuine leader. There was a bit of the Jean Todt there for a moment, which I think that's the sort of thing that galvanizes everyone back at base.
He's strong-willed. He's got a good sense of humour, but he is tough, and he's done it in the lower formula as well. I think that they believe in him as a kind of racer himself. That's what Ferrari need. I agree with you, Craig. I think that he could be a formidable leader going forward.
Yeah.
What a way to tee up the final race, but also next year as well.
Well, let's say just before George. Can George Russell end on a bit of a high? I guess that was something I was thinking about coming out of that race. He's felt a little bit low, hasn't he? He's hit his first little career plateau this year, and kind of, I'd like to see him have a decent high note. Again, he had that strange collision with Verstappen, didn't he? Which maybe robbed him of a pretty high finish. But I wonder if he can square up the head-to-head qualifying. I think it's 11-10 to Lewis, isn't it, going into that last event?
Yeah,
that would be a thing to. There's a lot of little, There's quite a few. All right, they're not. It's not the big showdown for the title or anything like that. But there's a lot quite interesting little things to be concluded, I think, in Abu Dhabi, which I won't see. I won't be there for. So.
But Simon, you will.
I will.
You one more day of rest, and then you're straight back to it. So best of luck.
It's all right. It's fine. We're used to this by now. I think.
of a 23 race season. So look, one more to go. We're going to be back obviously after Abu Dhabi to wrap up the season. So we hope you can join us then. But until next Tuesday, it's bye for now.